I see that. So this is welcome to track 12. I would like to introduce Geetika Rao. She is a MBA student here. She's going to help with moderation and any other assistance. Thank you for coming in, Geetika. And we have the first session event here is a panel. The panel is around expanding access to supplies through private sector channels. The panel moderator is Remy Edswen. I don't know if I didn't pronounce your name. I'm sorry about that. But you have the panelists. I'm sure you will introduce the panelists. So I see you're already able to share screen. So we don't need to do anything. So Remy, and then after that, so you're about 40-45 minutes because we have another talk after that before we end. So please take it away, Remy. I'm going to step out just for a minute. As you can see, I've been sitting in this place for
back. Yeah.
A short bio break, but please continue. Don't please continue. I don't want to interrupt that.
Okay.
So over to you, Remy. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Ravi, and yeoman's job you've been doing, and thank you for the great job on the Global Health Supply Chain Summit since the last couple of days. And a very warm welcome to first our audience, those who are connected from anywhere in the world, and especially to our panelists for today's session. So as Ravi introduced, I am Remy Adesina, and I'm director at Salient Advisory. Salient Advisory is a global health consulting firm, and our focus is on bringing cutting-edge trends, innovations in health supply chain, commercial models, as well as in the public sector, to the attention of global stakeholders. And that's why this event, the Global Health Supply Chain Summit, is an excellent one for us with the panelists we have today. So we have about 40-45 minutes, as Ravi has said, and just by way of introduction, we're going to have essentially two segments. There'll be an introductory session where we have a welcome remarks. Welcome remarks will be made by Anne Allen. Anne is a program officer in the global delivery programs at the supply chain. She's going to essentially headline this session to connect the dots as to why this is such an important piece for us to be discussing at this year's summit. And we have panelists from 3 great companies. They're leaders in those companies, and I'll be introducing them shortly so that we'll be able to proceed to the main event at the panel session without further introduction. So starting with Jessica. Jessica Vernon is founder of Maisha Meds. I'll come back to Anne when I'm handing over to her to do the welcome remarks. So Jessica, she's the founder of Maisha Meds, where she's also the chief executive officer, and it's just a demonstration of the passion she has that this is something she started right from when she was in Stanford School of Medicine, and she's taken it from there to very significant interventions on the African health care scene. The main focus of our operations are mainly around East Africa, and we'll be learning from her how things have tracked in the last couple of years since Maisha Meds has been providing solutions to many of the challenges facing supply chain of health products in Africa. We also have with us Dr. Olawale Duro-Simieti, and by the way, Jessica as well, I should be addressing her as doctor because she's also finalizing her PhD in Stanford as well. Dr. Olawale Duro-Simieti, he's the chief of party at John Snow Inc. In Nigeria, and John Snow Inc., for many who are familiar, is the leading development partner in the supply chain space around the globe and in Africa in particular. So together with his colleagues in East Africa who run the InSupply, which is part of what Salient Advisory focused on in the report we'll be sharing soon, Olawale will be providing perspectives, from the total market approach that they've adopted successfully in managing some of the most difficult challenges in healthcare, especially things like HIV, malaria, and others, using this approach also with the private sector. The third panelist is Patrick Russell. Patrick is Director of Partnerships at the Kasha Technologies, and his Kasha Technologies is an health e-commerce platform, a digital marketplace for women's health and self-care operating across Kenya and Rwanda. So these are the three wonderful panelists I'll be having, and to get to the introductory part, as I mentioned, Anne Allen will give the opening remarks, but just before I introduce Anne fully, we have with us a colleague of mine who's Oladuni Lawal, is Engagement Manager at Salient Advisory, and she'll be providing the report of the Salient Advisory work that was done tracking innovations across 4 countries in sub-Saharan Africa in the health product distribution space. And in the background, supporting us to make the transitions is Francis Olatoye, also a senior consultant at Salient Advisory. But let me invite Anne Allen. As I said, Anne is Program Officer Supply Chain at the Gates Foundation. And that work mainly covers the focus on private sector through portfolio of investments that are largely oriented towards better understanding and leveraging the private sector channel of delivery so that we can really have the best outcomes for the people around the world, especially in Africa. Before joining the Gates Foundation, she was a senior manager in Deloitte's supply chain strategy team, and her career has been, really dedicated to supply chain, having worked in Medicine Sans Frontier, and holds academic degrees in this discipline. So please join me as I welcome Anne Allen to provide some opening remarks and set the context for today's session. Anne?
Thank you, Remy, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone. I feel very privileged to be able to join this panel, but we'll keep my remarks short so we can hear from the rest of these exciting companies. My first point that I'd like to make out of 3 is that I think it's we need to move past this sort of false dichotomy between public and private sector channels of distribution and stop seeing them as completely independent supply chains. So I think that it speaks to a larger, it speaks to a movement beyond just supply chain, that public health is not just about the public sector, and I think all of us are a testament to that being here today. We know the evidence. We know that the majority in some countries in sub-Saharan Africa of care seekers go to the private sector first. But we also see the majority of government, donor, and even government spending targeting the public sector of distribution. So my first point is that I really feel the time is more than right to start investing in the private sector strategically and building these mixed health systems rather than the current silos that we oftentimes still see with public and private sectors. The second point, and very appropriate for the panel of innovators we have here around the table, is around harnessing that growth that we've seen in the Africa tech space generally, and particularly innovations around health product distribution. It was a few years ago that I was lucky enough to acquire the portfolio started by Prashant Yadav when he was at the Gates Foundation around building this market intelligence and taking a longitudinal look at how health product distribution innovations were growing across the continent, and specifically in 4 geographies. At the time, Salient Advisory identified around 60 health tech companies within those geographies, and at present are tracking more than 1,200 in the health tech space. So we've seen a very exciting and explosive growth in this space. These are dynamic private sector companies serving both public and private sector and both the demand and supply side. So I think, this space, especially with COVID, creates such an opportunity for us to leverage. And despite that, we still see significant barriers that we as donors and funders are motivated to address. And that's particularly acute in terms of funding barriers when we speak about African founders, female founders, and founders without ties to high-income countries. We definitely have seen and have been discussing internally and with many of our partners this need to become more intentional about how we invest in private sector innovators. I'm happy to share that together with the Children's Investment Fund Foundation and other interested co-sponsors, and with the support of Salient and Southbridge, we are designing a program which we're calling Investing in Innovation, that would be a Pan-African effort to more efficiently and effectively deploy our grant capital, and also to do that in a way that increases the equitability of our grant capital and how we deploy it across the continent. Paired with grant capital, we also recognize the need for greater, more professionalized acceleration support, and that is really tailored to the needs of the companies themselves. Ultimately, what we hope through this initiative is that we fill a gap, not all the gaps, but we help to support innovators in their earlier stages to effectively prepare them and position them for further growth funding and financing, and ultimately scale. The third opportunity I'll highlight is an opportunity around partnerships that won't also surprise you all who have been in this space and seen how scale can be achieved through deliberate partnerships. It's been encouraging to see some smaller scale yet nascent partnerships emerging, both in terms of public-private and private-private partnerships. And some of these were highlighted in Salient Advisory's latest report. I think we need to take a more deliberate focus in supporting these partnerships to happen and to take place. And particularly, I'll highlight the role that the public sector plays in terms of procuring and incorporating private sector innovation. We see the public procurement of private sector innovation is absolutely key to achieving the scale and the impact that we all desire in this space. So in summary, and without further lead up to the panel, I'll say public health, not just about the public sector, enormous opportunity to harness the growth in African health tech, and particularly in health product distribution, accelerate partnerships and create opportunities for the public procurement of private sector innovation. And these are all key to scaling and achieving the health impact that we all seek. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Back to you, Remy.
Thanks very much, Anne. And I'll invite Oladuni, who will make the presentation of Salient Advisory's report on the health products distribution in sub-Saharan Africa. Duni.
Okay, thank you very much, Remy, for the introduction, and thank you, Anne, for the thoughtful opening remarks. I'm now quickly going to go over the highlights of 2021 report on innovations in health product distribution. So first, in terms of project scope, the project is focused on innovations or innovative companies working to improve the movement of health products from the point of local manufacture, import, or clearance to the point of dispensation. And it seeks to answer two main questions. The first being, what are the key trends emerging in product distribution in sub-Saharan Africa? And also, how can global health actors help accelerate the impact and scale of high potential innovators? In terms of focus, we include companies providing solutions for providers such as inventory management, marketplaces for product ordering and fulfillment. We also include companies providing solutions for consumers such as e-pharmacies and telepharmacies. And lastly, we include companies focused on counterfeit drug detection and track and trace methods. The report also focuses on 4 primary countries in sub-Saharan Africa: Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and Uganda. So moving on to key findings. First, we're looking at the landscape of innovators working health tech innovators across Africa, it is clear that the health tech ecosystem continues to grow. There are more than 1,200 companies active in this space, and about 22% of these companies were founded in 2020. Also of this, approximately 70 companies are active in health product distribution. In terms of concentration, most of these companies are based in West Africa, with Nigeria leading the way. So regarding the types of solution offered by the companies, we have three main areas. So starting with consumer-facing services, provider-facing services, and product data services. What is new in this report, in this year's report, is that in comparison to last year, the previous reports that we've published, while all these innovators can fit into one of these buckets, about 30% of innovators offer a blend of services, and most common is the blend of consumer-facing services with provider-facing services. This is a trend that needs to be monitored to see if companies will continue to prioritize these broad-based approaches to services, or if the trend will change and companies will tend to specialize into one solution area. I'll quickly highlight our findings in terms of funding, and this is very much closely related to what Anna's mentioned earlier. Investment activity in the African health tech ecosystem is highly concentrated in the fintech sector. No surprises there. And as such, health tech innovators often struggle to obtain funding. So, but what we've also seen is that even within the health product distribution sector, the limited funding available is also highly concentrated. 7 companies accounted for 82% of all reported external funding in our research. Of these 7, only one of these companies has an African founder or co-founder. And in addition, while 2 of these companies have female founders or co-founders, none of them are Africa. This is further reiterating the earlier point in terms of barriers to funding for female and African founders without links to high-income countries. Another key trend we're seeing is that innovators are expanding their service offerings to provide end-to-end patient journeys. So this is being done to offer more value to consumers and also to drive growth for their businesses. So in terms of how these expansions are being done, we see our research has showed that this is being followed by partnerships in several cases. Rather than build out new capabilities from scratch, innovators are leveraging services provided by other players instead. As an example, in Nigeria, patient care providers such as Doctora and GeroCare would currently rely on mymedicines.com for the product distribution element of their service offering. Okay, next slide. So as innovators continue to grow, we feel that we need partnerships to power impact and scale. Partnerships with commercial and non-commercial stakeholders are needed, such as pharmaceutical and logistics companies, donors, and governments. Specifically, innovators need to become channels for the delivery of health products by large purchasers, producers, or distributors of medicines. A few emerging partnerships that we tracked with commercial stakeholders and reported on was such as Mydawa's with AstraZeneca. Also, some innovators reported working with private insurance companies for the sale of products and provision of services. When it comes to public health purchases, partnerships appear rare and smaller in scale. Excuse me. Yeah, we see that these partnerships are needed to enable innovators access publicly subsidized health commodities in order to serve rural communities, or also facilitate geographic expansion. Notable examples in these areas are Kasha's partnership with the Ministry of Health in Rwanda to pilot the home delivery of ARVs, and Med's expansion into Ethiopia via partnership with the Ministry of Health and JPEGO. The landscape is now changing positively, and we're starting to see new investments in this area, such as the Gates Foundation's recent investment in Mydawa, a Kenya online pharmacy. The last finding we would like to highlight is the significant growth in interest in distributing health products from e-commerce companies. Since our last report, we've surfaced 3 e-commerce giants that are active in health product distribution: Comia, Jumia, and Konga. However, due to some of the regulatory barriers, these e-commerce giants are primarily focusing on the distribution of OTC products. Regardless of this, their involvement in the space is significant, considering their reach, their scale, and their infrastructure. Put together, these three e-commerce giants boast more users than all the health-focused direct-to-consumer startups we've tracked in our reports. Therefore, it is key that we continue to watch the evolution of the interest of these three e-commerce giants in this space over the coming periods. To conclude, we have several recommendations from our reports and have highlighted 4 of them on the screen. The main recommendation applicable to this panel session being the need for stakeholders to actively mainstream effective partnerships with private sector companies or innovators. This will help to scale the impact these companies have and excuse me, this will help to scale the impacts these companies have and will help improve access to medicines in Africa. Thank you for your time. I will now hand over to Remy to start the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Oladuni. And I do hope the audience did pick quite a number of significant trends that she highlighted in that presentation. We have the opportunity to dwell on some of them in this panel session, but before we start, a few housekeeping rules in terms of how this will proceed. We'll prefer that if you have questions, so we can have a very rich interactive session at the end of it, that you post the questions from during this panel into the chat box. That way we can track it when we get to the Q&A discussion. And if there's a question that is already posted that you like, you can just give it a thumbs up so that we use that in prioritizing which questions or comments we pull up for engagement with the panelists. So to start the panel session, as I mentioned, we have Jessica Vernon from Maisha Meds, founder and CEO, as well as Olawale Durosimi, who's Chief of Party and Just Snow, and Patrick Russell. So the format to optimize the time will be that we'll have 2 rounds of questions, essentially. The first one will be general to all the panels, and essentially they will have the opportunity to describe their organizations and their unique value proposition and business model in the health care supply chain system. How have they been helping to address the challenges of availability, affordability, and quality of medicines? In general, access to medicine, how has their intervention been able to create impact since launch in Africa? So they'll have a go at that general question, and then I'll come back for a second round to more specific questions relating to each of the speakers' operational strategies. So let me start with Jessica, to tell the audience about Maisha Meds and how you're solving some of Africa's supply chain problems as a private sector player.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Remy. And thanks for having me here today. I'm sorry, I'm going to be coughing a little bit because I have COVID, but I guess to give you a bit of background on Maisha Meds. So we, our current work kind of grew out of just wanting to know more about how the private sector delivers care. So initially we built a point of sale system to give us a good sense of what was actually happening in pharmacies and clinics, especially in rural parts of East Africa. So that system is currently used by about 800 health facilities in the region. And as we started getting data back from the point of sale, what we started realizing was that even though there were a lot of products that were out of stock at many of these pharmacies, it was often because there was a demand side issue that meant that patients couldn't afford or weren't interested in purchasing a particular product. And as a result of that, pharmacies didn't feel like they were keen to stock it. And so we started thinking through this question of how you can enable technology to actually bring cheaper prices to patients. And we started out thinking about the actual supply chain and seeing if we could drive down the cost of care that way. But what we started realizing over time is that we actually just needed to set the price to the patient and use that lower price to drive increased demand. So we started off looking at two areas that traditionally have had lower stocking rates in rural pharmacies and clinics, especially family planning products and malaria rapid tests. And we started designing incentive systems to both make sure that the products were cheap for patients and that the prices for the pharmacies, or sorry, not the prices, that pharmacies had the incentive that they needed to actually make sure that those products were sold to patients. And so we've used all of the economics best practice to then set prices to patients for malaria rapid tests and make sure that the attendants who are actually selling the product to the patient are incentivized to do the rapid test. We're currently testing this approach via a randomized control trial with UC Berkeley, and it's showing about a 300% increase in rapid test usage across rural areas at about a $3 per patient price. So it has had a tremendous impact so far. And we're starting to think about how we might do this with a variety of other healthcare products as well. So we're currently looking at similar approaches with COVID antigen testing, which we're currently doing at about 30 pharmacies across the region, with COVID vaccines, and with HIV self-tests, and potentially some other products as well in the future. We found that you need to support that end-to-end piece, so make sure that the product's actually in stock at the pharmacy, but then also make sure that the patient is able to afford the product. And that longer term, this will play into how health insurance might be able to work in these rural areas as well, by simulating kind of a co-payment system where patients are paying a small amount, pharmacies are being reimbursed, and it's building these norms around how health insurance might work long-term. I'll pause there.
Wow, that's a really comprehensive intervention. And one of the best parts of it is your use of essentially user-centered design. First, you went in to study how it was going, identified what big problems are there to address, and what can be bigger than malaria. So it's really interesting to hear that they're also taking an evidence-based approach to validate your ongoing hypothesis. And I'm sure we'll all be looking forward to the outcomes of that randomized clinical trials, randomized control trials that you're doing. Thank you very much, Jessica. Next, I'll call Olawale to address the same question as Jessica had. What's your value proposition and how are you operating to expand access using private sector channels? Olawale.
Thank you so much, Remy. I want to start by saying that we are so proud that InSupply Health, which is an affiliate of GSI based in East Africa, is listed among the supply chain innovators in the Silent Reports. As you know, InSupply offers innovative approaches to solving supply chain problems with a strong focus on data visibility and use. Now to your question, I think Anne places it efficiently by saying that we need to start looking at public health intervention being limited to the public sector. And this is what GSI tries to address, especially in Nigeria. We try to address the challenge of sustainability of donor-funded and government-funded programs by introducing what we call a total market approach to programming. This actually is a market-shaping intervention which encourages the engagement of the private sector in public health implementation in Nigeria. And we work to ensure that the public sector, the private sector, and the social marketing sector coexist and work collaboratively to maximize the comparative advantage of the different sectors. So in specific terms, GSI market shaping interventions are aimed at identifying the weaknesses within the health market in Nigeria and working with stakeholders to come up with solutions that are implemented to address such weaknesses. So, for example, we have interventions that are aimed at demand creation for health commodities such as condoms, lubricants, ARVs for PrEP and HIV self-test kits. And we also have other interventions that are aimed at improving the supply of commodities across the different sectors by supporting forecasting for commodities and optimize distribution of commodities to ensure that the segmented population are reached based on their ability and willingness to pay for commodities. We also have some other interventions which are aimed at eliminating bottlenecks that limit new entry into the market. So we work with regulatory agencies such as NAFDAC in Nigeria to identify those bottlenecks and then provide solutions and then provide this information to potential investors to encourage them to have their products validated and registered in Nigeria. And more critically, we also support the generation of market intelligence, which are disseminated free to all stakeholders to guide their investments, to guide decision around programming, and to also ensure that we conduct research within programming, which can also generate additional information that can help improve programming, as well as providing technical support in terms of capacity for government agencies, because they play a key role in total market approach implementation by ensuring that they are able to coordinate all the different sectors within the markets in Nigeria. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Olale. And again, you echoed Anne's point, which itself also echoed the recent WHO intervention on the importance of not separating private sector from public sector when it comes to delivery of public health goods. And so that's the message that is recurring. The total market approach is how you are addressing that. And I think that's a very helpful intervention for using the private sector channels in addition to public and social sector. So let me invite Patrick, and I think we'll have to modify our approach a bit. We have about 17 minutes to the hour. And so Patrick's intervention will be followed by me opening the floor so that we can have at least 10 minutes for the engagement and the Q&A. So Patrick, please, let's hear more about Kasha Global and how it's addressing supply chain challenges, especially for the private sector.
Thanks, Remy, and thanks everyone for having us on this panel. Yeah, I think so. So Kasha Global, we're a digital retail platform operating in Kenya and Rwanda. We began operating in Rwanda in 2016, and really Kasha is built to provide affordable, accessible, and confidential products, services, and information to all women and all consumers. And we do that by we have an online platform, but also we have a USSD shortcode and Kasha agents on the ground. So all individuals with a basic mobile phone across Kenya and Rwanda can access Kasha products, whether that's through a USSD code, a toll-free number, an e-commerce platform, or through your local sales agent within your community. You can get access to health commodities from Kasha, whether that's menstrual health, sexual health and reproductive, maternal health, mum and baby, COVID. We have a range of categories, and we're an online pharmacy in both markets. So both OTC and pharmaceutical products can be accessed through Kasha. And for us, it's really around, we feel that the digital technologies have a tremendous potential to strengthen healthcare and disrupt global health for the better. And that's Kasha really wants to play a part in that. And for us, it's around accessible products to the last mile. So whether you're, for us in Kenya or in Nairobi or in rural Kenya, you can still get direct to consumer access. You don't necessarily have to travel, spend money traveling to a clinic to get access to your product. There may be stigma around the product that you're ordering. Why can't everyone have access to that product directly to their door and confidentially? Because there's then it's only you who knows what you're ordering. And there's a lot of power in that within the partnerships. And I know we are pushed for time, but so Kasha, that you touched on in your presentation, we work with private and public sector partners. And you know, as the old adage goes, you know, I really think we can go further working together. And we, as an example of that, work with the Ministry of Health in Rwanda to provide direct to consumer access to ARVs. And that's something that we feel the digital platforms like Kasha can really enhance access to public sector commodities. And there's no reason why we can't be stronger together and provide more access to products across the globe. But that's Kasha.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Patrick. It's really great to see that accessibility, even to the last mile, down to the rural areas, is a major offering that Kasha Global is bringing in. And this coincides again with yet another intervention yesterday. It was the International Pharmaceutical Federation talking about the role that online pharmacies and, by extension, online pharmacies and digital health health tech players like yourselves who are making products available using that digital technology. The COVID-19 has shown how important that has been in helping people at the last mile receive medication even when there was lockdown. So that's great to hear from you. Questions are already starting to come in. We have about 13 minutes. And so there's the opportunity for one question before the 10-minute mark when we open the floor. But I've noted the question from Yehuda and Jeffrey Jacobs. I think that's Jeffrey of Merck for Mothers has done an intervention to provide feedback. Interestingly, in the first year of this longitudinal study, South Africa was one of the countries under focus. Now it's Uganda, Kenya, Nigeria, and Ghana. While looking at South Africa, just like Jeff has mentioned, the automated dispensing machines were indeed an innovation, that were coming in. There's an isolated use in Nigeria as well. There's one of the players, Mikio, that is using that, but it doesn't seem to have gained as much traction, as one would have expected. But perhaps there are others in the room who have more information on how well it's tracking in South Africa, which is no longer in focus. Because of the disparities. They're far more advanced in the supply chain systems than the countries of sub-Saharan Africa. So to avoid skewed, insights, the focus now is on those four that I mentioned. But let me use this 2 minutes to ask this question about data. One of the recommendations that Oladuni put on the screen was about harnessing the data that is generated in the private sector engagements, of these innovators. And so if I look at Maisha Meds, for instance, in this, your interaction in the malaria space and all of that, where you're trying to change behavior, you're also generating data, working with patients, working with the practitioners as well. How can this data, rather than it being in silos, how can it be brought to use in an integrated way with the public sector for planning the overall supply chain?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Thank you, Remy. So I think early on, the majority of the data that we were capturing was through this point of sale system, where we were capturing about 300. Currently capturing about 300,000 patient encounters every month. So we have quite a robust data set about what's actually happening in the private sector. We currently share this information back with a variety of different partners in different formats. So we have real-time dashboards that update that are publicly available for any group to look at to see current trends in malaria, case management, family planning, and other areas. And then we also work closely with the Ministry of Health to try to give them information about what's happening in the private sector. And honestly, I think that one of the things that has helped unlock a lot more interest in private sector distribution is just being able to see what's actually happening. When we were working in this space, the private sector was quite stigmatized in terms of everybody thought they were kind of a bad actor in the overall healthcare system. And I think by providing information about the types of services that they provide, the prices that they're selling products at and what their supply chain looks like, we're actually helping to build visibility and interest in supporting them more than might have previously been the case. And we're very excited to keep doing that with the Ministry of Health in Kenya and Ethiopia, and hopefully in other countries as well. Remy, I think if you're speaking, you're on mute.
Oh, I beg your pardon. How will it be a Zoom call if there's no muted attempt of speaking? Right. There's a question from Ravi, Professor Ravi, overall moderator and co-chair of the GHSCS. And he's drawing attention that whereas there are many upsides to digital channels being available to move products down to the users, but what about the challenge that it could lead to the decimation of brick and mortar channels, like pharmacies and drug shops. What are your thoughts? Let me pass this to Patrick, who also has the e-commerce platform that is disintermediating in this way. What do you think in terms of this question from Ravi?
Yeah, thanks, Remy, and thanks, Ravi. It's a really interesting question, and I think you can look at it market by market. Interesting, you made a comparison to Amazon there. I think in if we take an example within Kenya, you have the likes of Good Life. I think they now have they have e-commerce and they have retail pharmacies. I think they can really support each other for the better. I think within this market specifically, there's a lot of importance around trust and in-person interaction, and so often a pharmacy may be there for the first interaction or the first purchase, and then you can back that up with the e-commerce solution to then support getting access to drugs and medicines and prescription medication. I think at the moment there's still a lack of online pharmacies, so people still want to go to the stores themselves. I think ultimately, if we can have a combination of both, that's where we're really going to win. But when we look at the last mile, there's still a huge expense there's a huge amount of money that people spend to travel to the clinics, the pharmacies themselves to then pick up medication. So if we can rule out that cost, and for example, at Kasha, we don't actually charge a distribution cost for those ordering through a USSD channel or through our agent, because it tends to be a different socio-demographic. So I think it's a long answer to your question, but in short, if we can get the combination right, it's very powerful. And I think especially in this market, we're not going to have an Amazon situation, but I think it's something to be definitely be wary of as we move forwards.
Thank you, Patrick. Opportunity to turn to back to Olawale of GSI. One of the things that you've indicated is the experience that GSI has working in the public sector. So in your view, what strategies do you think are required or will work best to build these partnerships between innovators, the development partners, and government? How do you think that trust, which Patrick talked about, that is important, not just between the consumer and the providers, but also amongst the sectors, between government and public sector and private sector, how can that be better developed?
Yeah, thank you, Remy. I think from our experience, a key strategy is to have an independent facilitator in the entire market, and this facilitator will support the entire process. This should be a facilitator without market interest, but interested in shaping the market to make it healthier. And this is the role that GSI has been playing in Nigeria since 2017. Such independent facilitator is able to breed trust among stakeholders and also create that open communication and engagement that are required for success. In addition to this, I think it's also critical that we utilize a system approach towards identifying and solving problems. This will also ensure that the different interests of stakeholders are discussed on a platform that should also be created where everybody can come and discuss issues. In addition to this, like I mentioned earlier, government needs to be the coordinator of the entire process. They must be at the driver's seat. And also we need to also ensure that government agencies have adequate coordinate sectors to ensure that whatever policies and laws that are being introduced do not unintentionally affect the different sectors, so that at the end of the day, everybody is comfortable and open to communication that will create solutions to make the market healthier. Thank you.
Remy, you're on mute.
Thank you. Another question has come in from, thank you, Olawale. I was busy acknowledging your response, but there's a question from Dr. Lloyd Matoe. I enjoyed the session he moderated and the opening day. He says that in poorly regulated markets, such as we see in some regions in Africa, what is the risk that e-commerce could increase the proliferation of substandard products in vulnerable countries? So let me make an intervention in that. Reason being, just today, Salient Advisory, working with the Pharmacists Council of Nigeria, helped to facilitate a session with stakeholders looking at the regulation of online pharmacies, of which e-commerce players are a part. One of the ways which the FIP also had in his report yesterday is that the playing in the e-pharmacy space, which is how e-commerce players provide medicines and health products, has to be regulated in a way that there is a brick and mortar address. So there's a traceability and there's an accreditation component where there's a kite mark or a logo that people can use to identify the genuinely accredited players. The ones who have entered so far on the e-commerce, large e-commerce level are by themselves very credibility conscious. And with the evolving regulation now and the ombudsman that could also accompany it, where the public has channels to provide feedback, this would be some of the mechanisms that will help stem the risk of substandard products. In fact, in Ghana, to wrap up the feedback on this, they are adopting a very integrated approach where it's not just regulations for online pharmacy, but they're introducing a national e-pharmacy platform. So all the product movement, the regulator would have access and they can use that as a basis, for ensuring that quality, good distribution practices are maintained. So that's something that might, really help. Ravi provides another feedback on the authentication at the consumer level that products, data services companies like Sproxil, like Pedigree, like PharmaSecure are providing. And more, we're seeing also even the online pharmacies themselves. We talked to Maidawa today in Kenya, for instance. They have those, authentication services on their products that a scratch mass authentication program can lead to confirmation of the genuineness or otherwise of products. And all of these are contributing to building trust in the consumers and ensuring countering of substandard and falsified products. So we have just about a minute. I think I'll just yield the floor to Anne to do a wrap up and close the session. But I thank the panelists for their wonderful interventions, as well as Oladuni and Francis, who have helped to manage this so far. So Anne, wrap up from you.
Thank you, Remy. I feel that we could have filled, 3 hours or a half day discussing this exciting topic and the implications of different business models that we're seeing emerging and partnerships and the very tricky and often neglected topic of trust, which I think is so critical. I want to come back to a point Jessica made that really landed with me, and it's about the role that creating visibility has in terms of building trust. And I think that's an important step as we break down this elephant a bit and think about how do we move the needle in a complex ecosystem of regulators and government and private sector at different points of maturity. So just want to thank everyone. I'm not going to be able to do justice to the full conversation, but thank you all for this conversation. look forward to continuing it in other forum and appreciate the facilitation you provided, Remy, as well as the hosting from Yehuda and Ravi.
Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you, Ravi, for the opportunity. Really grateful.
Thank you, Remy and Anne. And to your point, Anne, I think we have actually through, as an organizing committee over the years, if we go back 5-6 years or maybe more than that, most of the conversations in the GHSCS were on the public sector side, and we use the curated portion of the conference to bring in the private sector perspective, whether it's global pharma companies, et cetera. I think it's time that the discussion that is happening here, in fact, I do remember actually Maisha Metz, Jessica, you were there, perhaps in Lusaka. I can't remember now which conference you were there. So, but I think it's high time perhaps we elevate this to at a plenary level, so we reach a larger audience. So happy to work with you, Remy and Anne, for a future conference to plan that. So thank you again. Yeah. And we now pivot to, we have one more talk to go. So this is Ethiopia's journey in ensuring patient safety and supply chain efficiency through adoption of global standard GS1. So Anne, in her closing, talked about the need for visibility. So I think this fits really nicely to talk about GS1 standard. So who's taking this? Ms. Nuran, are you leading this?
Yes.
Okay, so I hand over to you.
Hi,
Okay.
I'm right here. Super.
Okay,
Sounds
wonderful.
good. Thank you very much. So let me try to first share my screen.
It's coming through.
Is confirmed. You can see that?
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much. So good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Good evening, if you're in East Africa like I am. It's really a great pleasure to be here with you. And I echo the comments that were there in the chat that, you know, the previous panel was just extremely exciting and relevant exactly to what we're facing now. And I hope that I should be able to also tie some synergies to what so some of the questions that were asked as part of my conversations now. So my name is Nuran Idris, and I work for GS1 Global Office as Healthcare Manager Africa. I am based in Nairobi, Kenya. And so what I want to do over the next few minutes, and first I apologize also, I was supposed to be here with the Director General of the Ethiopia Food and Drug Authority, but unfortunately, because of what's going on there, we're not able to have them here. So I will be presenting more from my perspective, but also would also attempt to share with you what DG Haran had hoped to share with you. Okay, so for starters, I was really excited to hear in the past, just the past conversation alone in the past few minutes, some important points, right? Quality medicines, online pharmacies, and the opportunities they present and the challenges also that they present, substandard products, quality medicines, confirmation of genuineness of products. So when I heard these words, I was like, oh, aha, this is exactly what we also talk about when we're talking about GS1-based traceability in countries. And this is not necessarily only a project that's focused on Africa. It's in fact a project that has been successfully implemented in over 70 countries around the world. And right now we're just starting to see some active engagement, some active conversation in countries in Africa. So that's what I hope to share with you. And as other panelists have done, please be sure to put any questions that you have in the chat, and I will go over them. I think somebody's on unmute, so if you can mute yourself, that would be super helpful. Thank you. So this is again on behalf of Director General of Ethiopia, EFDA. She had meant to present this, so I apologize again on her behalf. So that's just some background information about EFDA. I will just skip that. But this is the most important thing. The Director General of EFDA has always talked about, you know, what has pushed them, what has pushed Ethiopia to talk about traceability of pharmaceuticals. Ensuring patient safety is one of the most important one. combating falsified and combating falsified pharmaceutical products is something that was also mentioned in this panel, and I'm sure, or perhaps also in earlier conversations. Improving supply chain efficiencies are some of the important topics that are related to that are some of the benefits that the Ethiopia Food and Drug Authority saw when they thought about implementing pharmaceutical traceability. So how is it that they have done it? Or at least how is it that they're planning to do it? Because as you can see, some of these dates are in fact in the future. So they had decided to take on a three-phase approach. Whereas phase one, they decided to start by identifying, by making sure that the products is existing in the market. And I apologize, some of it might sound not very clear initially, but I'm starting with a use case, and eventually we'll talk to you a little bit more about GS1 standards, so bear with me, and I hope in the end it all comes together nicely. So what they had done as part of phase one is just to make sure that the products that are coming into the country are uniformly identified and labeled per global standards. They have chosen to use GS1 standards. So that's part of phase one in a nutshell. And that's been going on since 2018 up until 2020. Now, as part of phase two, which is currently ongoing, some of the things that they're planning to do, that they're currently doing, is batch traceability. And then also, they have also aspects of master data. Again, an important piece of pharmaceutical traceability there. And then in phase three, they aim to go to serialization. So what exactly do we mean between batch traceability and serialization? So batch traceability, as the pharmacists on the call in the virtual room would know, you have within every pharmaceutical production, you have batches, right? So what they're planning to do within phase two is to be able to trace just specific batches. So just up until the batch level, to be able to see where this product has gone from the point of the manufacturer up until it goes to the patient, but by batch number. The difference with serialization is that with serialization, they're able to track every instance of a product. So if I have a specific pack of product in front of me, then they will be able to, again, between 2022 and 2026, to be able to trace each instance of a product. It's a very ambitious initiative, and I'll tell you a little bit more about kind of like the infrastructure, the architecture that they have that they have put in place in order to enable this. So they have, again, when we talk about pharmaceutical traceability, when we talk about adopting GS1 standards, we don't talk about a system. We talk about a suite of systems, specifically when we're talking about pharmaceutical traceability. GS1 is not a system, it's a system of standards. It tells you how to identify and whatnot. I'll get to that later. But when we talk about pharmaceutical traceability, there's usually a lot of confusion that, can we get one system that can actually trace everything? But in actual fact, as you can see on the diagram on the screen, it's actually a suite of systems that come together in order to trace the product as it moves from the point of manufacture up until the point of user. So these are the systems that would be available at the EFDA, that is the regulatory authority in Ethiopia. And then at the far end here, you have the user-facing applications that will be able to facilitate traceability of these pharmaceutical products. I'll skip that one for now, but some of the important where is Ethiopia now and where are they going, right? So they have already issued a regulation, and they did this since 2019, I believe. And what that regulation stated was that any products that would be coming into, any pharmaceutical products that would be going into Ethiopia should be identified using the GS1 data matrix, and on it should contain a global trade item number, a serial number, expiry date, and a batch lot number. So that's what they had done. That was one piece. Obviously, as the product, as they're moving forward with pharmaceutical traceability, especially in country and beyond, they're still working on further strengthening the legal frameworks. And I think this also touches upon some of the points that were mentioned by earlier speakers. Digital technology, obviously, this is an important piece, especially right now, as an important enabler for traceability. They are currently working on master data sharing and capturing this data into their systems and processes. Stakeholder advocacy and engagement are super important. So they're engaging not only stakeholders in the country, but also in external stakeholders, just to raise awareness about what Ethiopia is doing with regards to pharmaceutical traceability, with regards to addressing the issue of counterfeit and substandard and falsified medication. And here are the important lessons. So buy-in is the most important piece, and buy-in of senior government officials senior officials within the government, and also active stakeholder engagement, again in that whole spectrum, both within the country and internationally, alignment with global requirements. Again, avoiding reinventing the wheel, rather than instead of reinventing the wheel, that this should align with what is going on around the world. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in my next slides. And then also starting small, so starting with a small group of products, just to be able to give the chance of the various stakeholders, the systems, to also mature, to understand, to learn, and eventually to get to a point that they want to get to. And then, of course, the most important, I think, well, one of the most important is incorporating traceability as part of new and existing short and long-term strategies that exist not only within the regulatory authorities, but within the ministries of health and other relevant authorities that are involved in the product supply chain. So that was me presenting roughly in summary on behalf of Director General Heran. She would have done a much more better job because she's physically there in Ethiopia. So now I put on my GS1 hat, and I will be able to tell you a little bit more about what GS1 standards are exactly at a high level, understanding that I only have a few minutes just to be able to share this message with you. So when you think about GS1 standards, I'd like you to think about three key words, right? Identify, capture, share. So GS1 develops standards that enable the identification of the various entities in the supply chain, right? So you have products. When you think about the supply chain, you have the manufacturers, you have the product, you have the patients, you have the third-party logistics provider, and many more. And you have the hospitals, the warehouses, et cetera, et cetera. So GS1 standards, GS1 develops standards to facilitate uniform identification of these various entities, right? So the GTIN, for instance, Global Trade Item Number, uniquely identifies the products regardless of where you are in the supply, regardless of where you are within the world, So whether, for instance, let's just think of company X, and they want to identify a product that they're manufacturing, they would assign that GTIN, and that GTIN would be unique as the product moves along the entire supply chain, and actually can be used, can be scanned, and the exact same information will be retrieved regardless where that particular person that is scanning is located. So we have multiple standards as well. We have the GLN, the global location number, and GSRN, for instance, that identifies caregivers and patients as well. So the second keyword is capture. And so when we think about the GTIN, for instance, you would have a product that would have 14 digits assigned to it. So as the product moves along the supply chain, instead of actually manually capturing those 14 digits of every single product, that information can be simply represented in a barcode, and then that barcode would be scanned, and that facilitates the retrieval of that information. And of course, it ensures quality, and it really ensures that the user is actually scanning the product, is actually retrieving the exact same product information that was there. And also we have share standards as well. And what the GS1 standards enable, especially when we talk about healthcare, I must also take a few steps back and talk about that GS1 standards are actually used in multiple sectors. I think it's more than 20 different sectors. So I'm specifically talking about healthcare. Obviously, there are the concepts apply, but to also the different sectors with some alterations here and there. And so GS1 standards, they enable end-to-end visibility, which is what I was just trying to tell you about from the Ethiopia perspective. And one of the main use cases that is for the utilization of GS1 standards or incorporation of GS1 standards into our process is the alleviation of falsified, substandard and falsified medication. And then, of course, at the end, it all contributes to improved patient safety. I know within supply chain, within logistics, we talk about ensuring that the patient has the product. And what I would like to add with the GS1 standards angle is that actually the product that is presented to the patient is actually of quality, not falsified, and actually meets the needs of that patient. So earlier I mentioned that GS1 standards are actually used to support pharmaceutical traceability in more than 70 different countries around the world. As you can see, the greens represent where GS1 standards are actually used, where pharmaceutical traceability is used and using GS1 standards. As you can see in Africa, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, we only have very few countries. If you can zoom in closely, you would see there also a tiny dot on Rwanda. So that makes 3 countries that have an understanding of GS1 standards. Obviously, this map also needs to be updated because as we speak, there's more countries that are coming into these conversations. We think of Zambia, we think of Botswana, Nigeria. I mean, I heard a lot of talk about what's going on in Nigeria and Kenya as well. So there's a lot of conversation as well that is going on. And these countries that I just mentioned are some of the countries that we expect in the next few months and
Looks like we lost Nuran. I think there is a power outage or something. I don't know what's going on. Nuran, are you there? Is there anybody else from that team who could step in? Okay. So let's see, we do have participants, so maybe we can, I think she disconnected, she might try to reconnect. Anybody doing GS1 in experience with GS1? Remy, you've done a lot of study of other organizations. Perhaps you could offer some perspective.
Definitely. There was the GS1 has started to take root, as she was mentioning, Nura was mentioning. There was the conference, GS1 Africa conference, started in Ethiopia, and Nigeria took the baton in 2019. But what's interesting to see is how quickly it is taking root. Nigeria, for instance, has used the GS1 system to do a pilot track and trace for the COVID-19 vaccines, which was a very successful proof of concept. And the next step is now rolling that out on a much larger scale. One of the countries that participated in that program in Lagos in 2019 was Zambia. And Zambia have taken that program, gone back home, and gone through the whole process to deploying the regulation and deploying the GS1 standards, in that country. So it's really going around the continent, as Nuran has mentioned. Over.
Wonderful. Nuran is back online. Okay.
My apologies.
No problem.
Sorry, I'm not even going to excuse myself, explain why
we just
went off the radar.
used the gap to engage Remy to offer some comment. That's okay. Please continue.
Super. Sounds good. Sounds good. All right. Can you see my screen, Prof. Ravi? Great. Okay, great. Okay. So I was just then talking about what I meant. I meant earlier about, there's more than 71 countries around the world that are using GS1 standards. So how exactly have they used these standards? What are some of the, how have they ensured that the manufacturers are able to actually accommodate all these different countries' needs? Because one of the things that manufacturers face, so every time, and for the manufacturers or the ones that have manufacturing manufacturing experience in the room, you would understand that anytime a manufacturer needs to stop the production process for any reason whatsoever, that means lost in cost, that means additional cost, that means time. And so one of the things that manufacturers have also gotten together, and we've also, have awareness about GS1 standards. So there's a consensus and common use of these 4 pieces of information and this particular barcode type to capture product information, right? So what you can see here on the screen, that's called a data matrix, a GS1 data matrix. Please do not confuse this with a QR code, because many times there is some confusion. So countries or many regulations around the world are requesting for a GS1 data matrix to be printed on a product pack, and in that data matrix, a global trade item number, a GTIN, a serial number, expiry date, and lot should be included in that data matrix, so that as the product moves along the supply chain, that information is retrieved and used consistently. So I must mention, again, referring to my earlier point, I kept talking about master data and whatnot. So the idea is that as the user scans this information, so let's think about Ethiopia, because that's the country I was just talking about. As the ports authority are scanning this product, they would be able to use the GTIN, this global trade item number here, in order to access more information about this product, including where it was manufactured, who was the manufacturer. So the where would be identified using one of the other GS1 standards called the GLN, what is the unit of measure, the pack size, et cetera, et cetera. So that this is like a key to access more information. So the key would be the GTIN, and the more information would be the master data. So at a high level, I hope that's clear. I believe you have heard already about this one from earlier sessions, the Global Trust Repository, which I believe may have been presented by Derek. And this is an interesting initiative that is actually ongoing, and that is a consortium of multiple development partners, as you can see on the screen. And the idea is to really provide an initially verification for COVID-19 vaccines, eventually for more. And then they are actually using GS1 standards as they're moving, as they're designing and thinking about this solution as well. So also another live example. And then additionally, WHO, the World Health Organization, also issued a policy paper in March of this year. And in this policy paper, they specifically talk about pharmaceutical traceability and specifically refer to GS1 standards, track and trace and whatnot. So I'll throw this link in the chat as well. It's a very interesting read. But it also goes into a little bit more detail about some of the items that I talked briefly about earlier. And that's the end of my presentation, really brief, just to give you a high level overview. And I will just look at the chat. Oh, okay, I'll look at the chat to see questions there are. I see only one. I believe there were a few more earlier, but they may have disappeared because I had to, I got disconnected from Zoom.
No, there were no
but the
other
difference
questions.
between
Nuran, that's the question
Okay.
that Ravi has. Please go ahead. QR code versus data
Okay.
matrix.
I'll go ahead. Okay, thank you. So the QR code and the GS1 data matrix, that's an excellent question. And that's actually one of the many questions that are one of the main points of contention when we talk to users. I think many people see a data matrix and think that's a QR code. So let me go back to my screen here. Yeah, this one here. That's just the GS1 data matrix. So when you look, if I don't have the QR code with me on screen right now, but there, if you take closely a look at the QR code, you would see that there are I think there are boxes on 3 of the corners, right? And so technically they're not very different. But in terms of use, the GS1 data matrix has been recommended and has been used, and a lot of technology, a lot of experience, a lot of thought has actually gone through to using the GS1 data matrix in order to support pharmaceutical traceability and the supply chain enhancement processes that we talked about. So technically, there is very minimal differences in terms of what information or how information can be encoded in these two data matrices. How they look, there's a very distinctive actually, that the difference between the two. But when we talk about, I think the huge difference is in terms of experience, in terms of use in the supply chain. And I'm talking about the entire world right now. So I perhaps maybe we'll just end there.
So I have a question. So first of all, thank you for sharing this, and thank you, Remy, earlier for your panel. Now, you mentioned, Nuran, about three things: identify, capture, and share, right? The three ideas. I can see that governments can mandate identification and capture. The sharing piece is a little bit tricky. Who do you share with, and who provides that platform for sharing, especially when you have drugs moving through both the public sector and the private sector, right? So I'm just curious, what is, and I don't know enough. I'll look up in the Global Trust Repository as well, but I can't believe that a national level or global level initiative like that for sharing is a feasible option. So, I would love to hear your perspectives on that.
Excellent question, Prof. So you're right. And perhaps maybe I should start by clarifying that the share part, so GS1 standards, the standards that GS1 develop are actually used to identify, capture, and share. And so this is really across the board, especially when we talk about the industry and countries relationship, right? So that's one part. When we talk about sharing data, especially when we talk about pharmaceutical traceability, what products are coming into the country, where are these products going, what are the consumption trends and whatnot, that part is guided by local regulation, by local systems. So there would be a local architecture. So let me just go back to the Ethiopia structure. Here, so this suite of systems here would actually be the systems that would be used to guide or to store and to share this information across the supply chain. So GS1 just develops guidance on how, for instance, master data can be shared. So for instance, let me just give you an example. So we have a manufacturer in, let's say, in Belgium, right? And they want to be able to share their product information with one of their distributors, one of their suppliers, or one of the retail point of sales. So they can actually use GS1 standards. There's a standard called GDSN, Global Data Synchronization Network, that facilitates that sharing. So the local sharing is done, it needs to be built locally. Obviously, GS1 standards can provide guidance on that one, but none of it is actually made internationally available. None of it is shared beyond the borders of that particular.
Thanks for that clarification. I think that it is standardizing the format for sharing, not the actual act of sharing. So earlier, last year, I shared a industry forum. So there is a company here in the United States. I can type in the chat box called TraceLink. Now, TraceLink has been capturing data across the industry. One of the big challenges is, so what you're showing here is coming into the country. Yes, I can do that. But downstream data is the critical data that anybody who's supplying into the country would like to know. And it was interesting moderating that forum with many of the pharmaceutical companies, a few distributors, many of the provider sector in terms of hospitals and retail. Every pharmacy manufacturer's big pain point is, I need to know consumption data. And here is an opportunity, because what the United States, I think, is, it's already there coming in GS1, but 2023, it's going to be mandated that downstream data needs to be captured. So once that